Today we're going to talk about returning to in-person events. Before we actually fully get started, I just wanted to get an idea of how many people on this call today have had an in-person event with that was indoors in the past 2 months. So if you could go ahead and let us know. Keep that open for just one more minute. Okay. So it looks like the majority of people have not had an indoor in-person event yet. And it might still be a few months before you still have that, but we wanted to hold this discussion with you guys today and give you some tips, some tricks of things that we've seen, things that we've heard. Ooh, first one's tomorrow, Jamie. That's exciting. But the other thing we wanted to take some time with today is also just about your mindset of returning back to in-person events, about the chapter in general. We've seen a lot of research coming out lately about the comparison of what's happening today and what happened in the recession in the 1920s. And they're finding a lot of correlation between those. There's a really good article that we'll share with the whole group in the weekly email from the Wall Street Journal that goes really into depth about the different areas. But that's including labor, pricing models, how people are doing business. And so we just really want you to be prepared mentally and your chapter mentally for the future, and really getting in that mindset that even though everybody wants to kind of return back to how it was in 2019 or prior to COVID, that's probably not going to happen. And we still, even after we get past the vaccines and things like that, we're still going to have to be in the right mindset that it's not going to return to the same things that we were doing.
And Kelly, can I add one more
Yeah.
thing? The other thing too that we're going to talk about is with the Roaring '20s, of course, everybody after the great influenza was over, they just came out and started to party and to dance and to see everybody and have a good time. And so we're going to talk a little bit today, and we're going to touch on it about waivers and codes of conduct, because we have heard from some chapters that that's the effect that's happening, that people are so excited to get out and have fun and, you know, have a drink or two or three or four, and we've had some mishaps. So we are going to also touch on that today as well. Thank you, Kelly.
Great. So all of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, we've got lots of examples, whether they're from CAI or the meeting industry, such as ASAE or Event Industry Council. And we've actually put a lot of that into our toolkit. So if you want to check that out after this meeting, you can go to the toolkit, and there'll be an area for the chapter knowledge series, and it will be under there, all of these different types of examples, checklists, references for you. If you are looking for something and you don't see it there, please feel free to either use the exchange with the CED group to see if there's any other chapters that can supply a sample for you to use, or to let us know, because we might have one again from CAI nationally, or, you know, we can always see if ASAE or the Events Industry Council has some resources for that too for you. So the first thing I just want to talk about a little bit is how are you planning to manage vaccines and people having them? Have you guys thought about that? Has that been brought up by any of your boards? And feel free to just come off mute and discuss. This is much more casual than a lot of our other knowledge series that we've had.
So we have a happy hour tomorrow. Tomorrow night. So our board president's an attorney, and we talked about vaccines. And the messaging is simply that you know, if you're fully vaccinated in Virginia, you don't have to wear a mask. You don't actually have to wear a mask at all. It's completely voluntary. So our messaging simply will be that if you're fully vaccinated, feel free to not wear a mask. If you're not vaccinated, it's kind of up to you, but masks are encouraged. You know, we've decided that we can't require vaccination.
And are you planning to ask for any identification, or it's kind of just self-policing that
Nope,
model?
self-policing. We've decided we just don't want to get into that.
Yep. Any other chapters? Go ahead, Tony.
Kelly, yeah, we basically taken the same approach. Our trade show, we're having our trade show. It's tomorrow and Thursday. We originally were going to require masks, even if the state didn't. And what we're doing now is essentially following the State Department of Health and the CDC's guidelines on masks. So instead of saying, well, what we're basically saying is we're only addressing unvaccinated attendees, and we're saying, according to the Department of Health and the CDC, unvaccinated individuals are strongly encouraged to wear a mask. And as Jamie, we're not asking about vaccination either.
Great. And are either of you or anybody else planning to have masks for people to grab, or is it on their own for that as well?
I have disposable masks like in the lobby of the office. We'll have them tomorrow night. People want to take one, they're welcome to one. You know, otherwise they'll go back to the office. But yeah, we'll have them available if people want them.
And we have a small supply. It's not a lot. We're not bringing them with the expectation of having to supply them to members or attendees. We're having them in case someone doesn't have one and they need one.
Perfect, perfect. So while people are going through this planning process, and thank you, Jamie and Tony. The one thing is, a lot of groups are having this discussion about whether to require a vaccination card, how to monitor that, whether it's up to us as the organization or not, or even a waiver. There's been lots of discussions on a lot of different boards about offering a waiver for people to sign. Truthfully, from us nationally at our national conference coming up in August, we are not going to be monitoring the vaccines of people. We are not asking for that. That's going to take a lot of work to monitor and to process and to verify. And we felt like, again, that wasn't something that was in our realm. We've got to take people for for truth and say, if you're vaccinated, then yes, please, you don't have to. Otherwise, we do recommend a mask to be worn. You also have to look at the venues that you're using and what policies. I know on a call last week, rules were very different in a lot of states and a lot of different areas. But at the same time, it's changing constantly. I know here in Illinois, a rule was just changed as of Friday. And so everything's completely different in our world here as of Friday, and more changes are supposed to be happening in the next couple of weeks. So just make sure that you guys are monitoring those, that you're keeping up with the venue of what they want to require and not require, and what you're responsible for with that. Also, if you have any questions, please make sure you talk to your attorney or one of your attorney members that you have. I know a lot of our boards have attorney members too that you can discuss some of these things with.
Hey, Kelly.
Go right ahead.
Hi, everybody. With the venues and talking to your venues, from your research on this, isn't it true that if the venue is requiring either proof of vaccine or mask, that is on the venue to enforce, so the chapter shouldn't be taking that on?
Correct. Yes. If
Okay.
the venue's making that requirement, it's their requirement to enforce that rule.
Okay.
So again,
Thank you.
Again, make sure you're having these discussions with your venue. We do have a checklist, a return to in-person meeting checklist from the Events Industry Council. I believe it's 2 pages, like a front and back, if you print it off that way, of just questions to ask, things to remember. So again, you might not need all of it, but I think it's a really good place to start, especially after not holding an event for the past 12 to 18 months that was in person and indoors. So that's a really good resource to have if you need that. What about social distancing? How are you all planning to handle that?
So our event tomorrow is a happy hour. So we're at a restaurant. Crystal, you should come. Right down the road. And so I know that the capacity is 135 people there. I don't think 135 people are going to come at one time. It's kind of an open house situation. But you know, we can't be vaccine police. We can't be 6 foot. We can't walk around with yardsticks and be 6 foot policemen either. And so I kind of like the social distancing. I don't need someone like right in my face anyway, regardless of COVID or not. So I don't really mind the social distance, a 6 foot thing. So it's really kind of, everyone's on their own, on their comfort level. And, you know, we can't run around policing that kind of stuff. And I think we've all done this for a year now. And so it's almost normal now to not stand so close and to be away from each other. So I'm cautiously hopeful that we would just all behave appropriately.
Now, Tony, yours is a little different because yours is a trade show. So how are you handling that?
I'll answer that, but I just want to answer Jamie. Good luck getting people to behave.
Hey, listen, nothing if not hopeful.
We are same as Jamie just said. You're on your own. You know, you've done this for a year and a half. You should know to social distance. In Pennsylvania, that all of the mandates have been lifted, so there is no requirement to social distance. The only thing that we are doing is at tables for meals and in breakout sessions, we are putting fewer seats per table to force people to not sit on top of each other. But outside of that, again, we're expecting that people will behave. Knock on wood.
Hey, Tony, I'm sorry, Kelly.
No, go ahead.
I just have a question. For your trade show, did you make any accommodations between booths or your aisles or anything like that to accommodate for greater space?
We did, and so the floor plan was drawn up back in September, and things obviously were very different back then. We didn't alter it in the last month or two. We typically have 10 by 10 booths. We made every booth 10 by 16. And we intended to restrict exhibitors to a 10 by 10 space within that 10 by 16 pipe and drape setup. We were going to tape off the floor. And we're not doing that. I mean, they're basically getting a 10 by 16 booth. If they want to occupy the whole thing, I'm sure some of them will. I'm sure some of them will behave and listen to the 10 by 10 rule. We decided not to change that. We were about 2 months ago considering one-way aisles. We did away with that just because things have changed so dramatically, fortunately in Pennsylvania, that some of these decisions we're spared having to make.
And I think it goes to the comfort level that both Tony and Jamie that you guys mentioned of people's comfort level. So even while restrictions are being lifted, people are still getting back into the swing of things. And so being put at a banquet round with 12 people might not be the most ideal situation where you're elbow to elbow with people and you're touching, you know, it still might be, you know, let's have it only 6 per round, or let's still do only 1 person per 6 foot table versus 2 for right now. So it's also making sure that with your venue, you're still able to space out if possible a little bit. Again, we've just been seeing with people coming back, their comfort level with some of these things, even though they want to be back in person, they might not want to be right on top of someone again. You know, there's lots of those conference spaces that when you set up theater style, the chairs still hook together, you know, and so it's, you know, maybe let's not do that yet when we're going back to these in-person education events or these dinners. So just keep that in mind too, that even though these restrictions are being lifted by the venues and by the different states and even from the CDC recommendations, doesn't mean that you should necessarily do that for the comfort of your attendees too. So if you've got that space, you might want to think about being able to still spread out a little bit. How are you guys dealing with pricing increases? We've heard a lot from different venues that they're increasing prices. How are you guys going about that for the next few months, especially?
Kelly, we haven't really seen pricing increases. What we're experiencing is in a lot of cases just the inability to book places because they're either booked up solid already, or the other thing we're hearing from people is they are, like we are, so utterly overwhelmed they just don't have the time to get back to us. And hopefully that will ease up soon, but that's our biggest issue, is just getting people to get back to us.
Chris, I see you came off mute.
Our regular events like the luncheon and my golf tournaments, I've all re-signed up, and gala, everything, they gave me the same pricing I had this year and pre-COVID. What I had trouble with was that dang chapter party. Those one-time events on the strip are outrageously priced. And that was what was hard. Those prices were, like I told you, I think on one of the last calls, the party we had at the at Gillies in 2017 doubled in price. It went from $67.50 a person to $144 a person for the exact same thing. So that the regular events that you do all the time, the venues have been really fine to work with and very accommodating, but it's the one-time things that have been hard.
So one thing to think about with that is a lot of the different places and venues are still honoring those past prices, especially for, you know, contracts that they've already had, or because of those relationships. But they're also going to be looking at prices increasing. The cost of labor we're seeing is increasing in a lot of places. Just to be able to get people with the right skills in to do the jobs. And so the venues are really seeing that. So again, when you're starting to go through your budgeting process, if you don't already have a contract in place with menu prices in place as well, because again, let's be realistic, it's usually the food and beverage that's one of the most expensive, and then the AV packages too for your events. So if you don't have those guaranteed prices in your contracts, especially when it comes time to do your budgeting, make sure you're looking at that, or you're bumping up some of those increases of what your spend is going to be, because we are hearing that from a lot of venues that they might be able to honor some people with old contracts, but they are planning on doing these increases, especially in 2022. Just by a raise of hands or thumbs up on your computer, if you don't have your camera on, how many of you have a code of conduct for your events that you supply to the attendees? So I see a couple hands raised. That's great. If you don't have one, we highly recommend that you have one, and that you're making sure that you're supplying that to the attendee. Whether that's a link to something on your website, a link to the PDF, if it's in the confirmation email, but making sure that the people actually know that you have a code of conduct and you've actually shared it with them. It's one thing to say that you've got the policy and it's hidden in your policy binder that you have in the chapter office. It's another to actually make sure that the attendees have that and that you can reference that. Kathy, I see you said you've got one that the board and the committees and the staff signs. It'd be really good to have one for your events as well. So we've got several from a couple different chapters up on our website, along with ours that we have nationally for you if you want to update. But it goes more in depth about what's expected from an event attendee. So again, that helps so that if something does happen, if you do have to ask someone to leave for whatever reason, you've got that policy that you can go back to for that, especially knowing that people haven't been in person, at least for a lot of our chapters, in a long time. And so they might be anxious, they might not be, but again, you just want to make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row in case something does end up happening. Along that issue too, how many of you have an anti-harassment policy that you use or have? Okay, a lot less hands this time. So I definitely recommend the anti-harassment policy. Again, in the toolkit, we have the CAI anti-harassment policy. We've got a link to our website for that. So you can always use that again. And if any of you have good policies that you'd like to share with other chapters, please send them over to Emily and we'll get them added to the toolkit as a reference and example as well. But the anti-harassment policy is really good for any of that bad behavior. And we have seen that a little bit. We've heard some chapters who have used kind of the red, yellow, green, and some of the people who have had red, people have said some things too. So again, this anti-harassment policy reaches, you know, that farther scope of people are coming back, they're getting used to being around people again, and it gives you that policy to point back to if you need to for any of the issues. In terms of overindulgence, we've been hearing a lot about that. How do you plan, or how have you dealt with that when you've had issues with that? Whether, I know some people have issues with that prior to COVID, so any sharing would be great.
So like I said, ours is a happy hour tomorrow night. So the first time we're out of the gate, we're at a bar. So that'll be interesting. But what we do is, one, we don't pay for the whole bar. So when Crystal, for instance, if Crystal comes, then when she arrives, she'll be given 2 drink tickets. And so we will pay for her first 2 drinks. And then at that point, I watch around, but we utilize the bartender, right, as police. Like, he can cut anybody off at any time. And we have signage everywhere at our events that say, you know, please drink responsibly. And if you need a ride home, the chapter will pay for the Uber. On the right, I will pay for everyone. If they need an Uber home, I will put it on the chapter credit card, and we will pay to get them home. Because I'd much rather pay that $25 than get an email the next day about a number.
And with that Uber piece, is that on the signage, or is that just, you know, at the registration desk? How do you?
It's on the signage. It says, you know, if you need a ride home, please let a chapter staff or registration staff know, and we will assist you in getting home. And we've actually never had to do it. We've never actually had to pay for the Uber. Typically, you know, one of their friends will step up and be like, I got them, and take them home and things like that. There was one golf event 2 years ago that my committee chair literally sat in this member's car while she slept it off enough that she could then drive her home. And so we've started limiting and asking people to limit what's out there.
We have the same thing, except we call it Safe Ride Home. Mm-hmm. And everybody, but we sell it as a sponsorship, and so we get it sponsored.
Even better, I love it, Kelvin.
And there's a, you know, we have a sign at the desk. Your safety is important to us. If you're not feeling able to drive, Safe Ride Home, sponsored by blah blah blah, whoever it is, and we sell it for like $500.
Kelvin, I'm writing it down.
And it works really well. And I think we've had to use it twice. And it's a code through Uber that we give out to anybody who wants to use it, and it's only good for that event, and it works.
Chris, I know you said you do a designated driver. Is that through a ride share service, or is someone actually a designated driver?
Used to be there was a company that operated here that you could just purchase, but now we just throw them in a cab. So, and we've had to do it a few times. Uber here is still not good. It's had a tough time coming back from COVID. So, I mean, I just flew back from Reno last week, and there's probably a 2-hour wait at the Uber lot at the airport.
That's good to know before we all come visit you.
Yeah, they're changing some things mid-month, so hopefully that'll fix itself by the time you all get here. And I'll keep you posted on how that is looking. I think Holly's here right now, isn't she?
Yes.
I believe she is. Yeah.
That's why she's not with us today.
Yeah.
Chris is going to have to come pick up all the executive directors of the airport. Chris Uber.
Right? And my Highlander. I'll get 6 of you at a time. So, but anyway, no, we just started, and I was using the Uber code because you could buy. This is pre-COVID. I haven't tried it since. The golf tournament we just had, we didn't have to use it, but I had signs everywhere, and my committee people were watching, and we were just going to buy them a cab ride home if they needed it. So.
Great. Anybody else want to share? For those of you who have had events, whether they were inside, outside, but in person, are there any challenges or successes that you'd like to share with the group?
I'm happy to update you guys after a happy hour tomorrow night.
Kelly, I had my first in-person event last week. We did it at a park. It was our manager appreciation reception that we do every year. We had really good attendance. We had over 100 people. But I guess my only piece of advice is we did do the different color bracelets. And I did find that people that were wearing the red ones were kind of being talked about a little bit behind the scenes. And everyone wanted to hug or touch people regardless of the bracelet they were wearing, and especially me. So I consider myself kind of a social butterfly, but it was awkward at some points.
Yeah.
Because people, not everyone was I guess you're gauging your comfort level.
Yeah, Kathy, that's a very good point. There was a front page Wall Street Journal article, I think it was last week, that talked about the red, yellow, and green bracelets and just that dynamic, that the attendees that were wearing the red bracelets sat in the corner or were looked down upon, or, so that's a really valid point. And Kelly, I don't think we're not using red,
We're not
are
using
we?
red at the national
At the
conference.
annual conference, no.
Yep. We're
Yeah.
only going to have the green and the yellow, and we're going to have signs around of what that means with it. But for that exact reason, we decided not to do the red for the annual conference.
Thank you for sharing that, though, Kathy. I was wondering if that was going to be an experience that would happen at our chapters.
So, Kathy, based on that experience, do you plan on using the coloring system again in the future?
Yeah, so we have our first in-person trade show in August. That's our next in-person event that we're doing that will be indoors. So I don't know, I think the board members are going to have to talk about it and see what we think. I don't know. I feel like we still have to offer the red, but we did have some business partners that were kind of saying gosh, if they're red, then why are they here? I heard that from more than one person. And I'm like, well, because they want to see everybody. They just don't want to be touched, and they want to remain social distance. But yeah, so I haven't, we haven't really decided that yet, but I guess my gut's telling me that we're probably still going to have red, just to be on the safe side. I don't know. We'll see what the board comes up with.
I was going to share that I would maybe hesitate with the red and do a pink, because red comes off very harsh, but you are going to have people who are still going to wear masks and who are still going to social distance, who still want to be apart, but maybe aren't comfortable because of health concerns with touching. And the pink is maybe a little bit lighter of a, hey, we're not saying no, we're just saying, I want a little bit more distance than you would give me with the yellow.
Thanks, Kate. Anybody else? Is there anything you guys are really worried about going back to in-person events? What's keeping you up at night right now?
Participation. A lot of our managers in Nevada, it's you need a CE credits to keep your license, and so we decided our business partners are the ones, they want to be in front of people, and so we moved the manager classes back to in person, and it's really, like most of them, it's topic driven. We had a class up in Reno last week based on the movie Roadhouse. But so obviously it was well attended, but I have one next week that has foundations, structures, and they only have 6 people. But what we're getting at is I'm flat out hearing they don't want to leave Zoom. They want all their education on Zoom, not in person.
Yeah,
They
attendance is
don't want to
my,
get out of their yoga pants. And I don't blame
yeah.
them, but I mean, come on.
Yeah, attendance is we have an in-person conference with all the Virginia chapters that is the first week of August. And typically at this time, we're sold out of our business partner packages, and I'm putting people on a wait list, and we're half sold out of business partner packages, and attendance is much lower than before, and the room block is slow to pick up. And so, I'm not sleeping because my chapter would have to pay that attrition bill this year. And so, do people want to get together? Of course they do. They want to go to conferences. Are they going to do it, or are their companies going to say, yes, go off and do this? I'm not seeing it yet. I mean, we still have just under 2 months, so it could pick up, but I'm not seeing it yet. So that's, and like Chris, like we had our virtual conference last week. It ended Saturday afternoon. And that's why I still look tired, because even virtually it's exhausting. And it went amazing. And thank you, Crystal. I didn't get to like pop in and see you. I saw other staff, but not you. But they loved it, and they loved the virtual education and the on-demand ability. And the managers are like, do this. Don't, I can't wait to see people, but I don't really want to come back all the way, because they don't have to give up half their day.
Question about that, Jamie. Yes, and we did participate virtually. And any of you that are doing virtual conferences and stuff, we're happy to assist or participate in a booth, etc. And I'm starting to venture out. So, if you guys are having stuff coming up that you'd like a presence, we're kind of evaluating them on a case by case. But to Jamie, your point is, I know you and I have had conversations, and also with others, about hesitancy for people to stay virtual in a trade show environment because they want to come back, but yet we're not seeing them come back. And I'm just curious how, I just don't, it's hard to figure out how we move forward with that, because we think they're going to go one way, and then they say they want to go one way, and then they don't show up. So I know you're probably all dealing with this, but I don't know what my question is.
Yeah, but Crystal, I think that's fundamentally what keeps me up, right? Is that we get these, so VLR is the conference, Virginia Leadership Retreat, and everyone's like, I can't wait for VLR, I can't wait for VLR, blah, 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 and so we hear it anecdotally, and then I'm like, well, but I don't have your registration, so are you coming? Oh yeah, I don't know if I can get it approved. So I want to come, but I don't know that it's going to get approved, or or I have to choose one or the other, and I'm not choosing VLR. Things like that. And even with the virtual conference, all the feedback I'm getting right now is, yes, absolutely, next year we need to be back in that expo hall at the convention center. We need to have our booth, blah, blah, blah. But can you please not get rid of the virtual aspect? Because we want that too. So now they want both things because they saw the value, but they still want to be in person.
So I have a little anecdote to offer, which I think is helpful here. We, throughout most of the last year or 15 months or whatever, we didn't really see a decline in attendance. They came virtually for almost everything that we did. We had some events late last fall that got canceled because we didn't have the numbers, but for the most part, even as late as March, when we had our spring manager symposium, we saw the exact same number of people who came March a year ago on site. That was our last event in March of 2020. So fast forward to this week, our trade show, we have 206 registered, which is about down, it's down about 35 to 40% off of our last in-person trade show. And only like 28 of those 206 are virtual, because we're doing a virtual portion of the event next week. So we're hearing all the same things. We want to get back to in person, but for those that don't want to get back to in person, they're not attending this event virtually next week. They're just not participating at all. And so we're now talking about, fast forward a year from now, when we do our next trade show, do we even bother with a virtual component of it? It's kind of the opposite of what we expected. So I don't know what to make of it, but I just throw that out there for conversation, I guess.
Yeah, we have, I mean, I'm with you, Tony. So if I look at registration body count, right, over the last year with all of our virtual stuff, our body count was really good in turn, right? But then we couldn't charge the same registration fee for a 1-hour webinar that we could charge for an in-person, manager lunch and things like that. So while our body count was steady, our revenue was significantly down. And then with Conference and Expo, while I'll tell you that like I have never been so proud of a Conference and Expo as I was of last week, because it was crazy like virtual management and having to pivot and learn it all, and 4 staff running it at the office. It was like a madhouse there. And it got done and the platform didn't crash, which was like my nightmare all week, is like, oh God, don't crash, don't crash, don't crash. And it didn't, it was fine. We only had 33% of our regular attendance at our expo for attendees, and we only had about 25% of exhibitors come back. So, going back to in person, next year, is it the floodgates going to open, everyone come back? Or are 75% that didn't show up as exhibitors like, well, I didn't really need that show anyway, right? So why go back? Or, oh, I liked it virtually, so I'll just take the virtual aspect instead of, and not show up. And so now I have this big, huge hall and no bodies walking through it. So it again feels like returning to in-person events again feels like when we had to go to virtual events where we're standing in front of a wall and we're blindfolded and we're throwing darts at the dartboard that's somewhere on the wall, but we're like just hoping that we hit it. So it feels like that again.
And that's probably not going to change for
No.
at least the next year to 2 years,
No.
right?
Right.
So, one thing to think about with all of this is I think everyone's trying to find that magic potion. What do we do? Do we do virtual? Do we do hybrid? Do I do this? One thing you've got to think about is, what's best for your chapter and what are your different events that you have. So, a happy hour social is going to be much different than an education event. And based on your chapter too, we've got the Heartland chapter that covers multiple states. And then we've got the Ohio Valley chapter that only covers, a small couple of counties. So again, those are 2 completely different chapters. They're connecting with 2 completely different types of members. Where one, they might only have to drive 20 minutes to get to where the education event is, sit for the hour education, 20 minutes back to the office or their communities. Where other people, depending on if you're in a big city, again, with Jamie, I know this probably, traffic. And so what time of day you're
Oh yeah, traffic came right back. Traffic
right?
came right back with a vengeance, and now it's worse than it was before. Don't you think, Crystal? Now instead of having like 2 rush hours, it's just rush hour. Like
Just rush hour, yeah.
Even at 3 a.m. It's ridiculous.
Exactly.
So we have that situation where we cover a region, which you should be able to drive across. I mean, the office from my house is like 16 miles, so that should take me not that long, but it took me 40 minutes this morning when I ran in there. So we are going hybrid. And so last week we upgraded our wireless system. Crystal and I talked about it. I think that the wireless system in our chapter office, Crystal, I think, put in when she was at the chapter, or maybe right after you left the chapter. It was that old. So we upgraded our wireless system, and then tomorrow I'm having webcams installed into the conference room so that when we come back to education, everything moving forward for the foreseeable future will be offered hybrid. So we're calling it choose your own adventure. So we'll have, we know how many people I can sit in that conference room. So there'll be that many in-person seats, and then there'll be, 7,000 opportunities to join us virtually, and they'll just be zoomed in and have the same experience at the same time. And that way people don't have to drive around the Beltway. They don't have to give up half their day sitting in traffic to come to a 1.5 hour session, or if they're not comfortable yet, they don't have to. And we'll use that for education. Our board meeting at the end of this month will be our first run at that. And then committees will use it for their meetings too, because the committees virtually have been amazing.
Yes. How have you guys liked having committee meetings virtual and board meetings virtual?
Our committees, I mean, not 100%, but the trend is you have a few people that are the worker bees and everybody else just likes to tune in on Zoom and listen. I'm
So
not a
will
fan.
you continue to stay on Zoom for those meetings, or will you move back to in-person?
We're
meetings?
morphing into in person. So yeah, it's just, you know, they're lurkers and it's like, I don't need you on the committee if you're just going to be a lurker. So,
It's funny.
they don't hear that, but that's what I think.
We had basically banned all teleconference meetings prior to COVID and said, look, if you can't be there in person, don't come. You know, tell us why you can't make it. You'll get an excused absence, but you can't call in. You can't video conference in. You know, and there was some grousing about it, but people showed up and they participated. Since COVID, our participation has been through the roof on our Zoom calls. And I don't know that we're going to go back anytime soon. I mean, you know, Tony will make that decision, but our committee participation has been much better since going fully virtual. And you know, we're back in the office now 3 days a week, but with no plans to invite the committees back in. The quarters are a little bit cramped anyway, so we don't necessarily want them all in the office yet. But yeah, Zoom has worked really well for us.
Yeah, Michael, we have the same experience. It's been great. Like we have steady participation. Again, people don't have to drive an hour, sit an hour, drive an hour.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it. You know, our chapter is so spread out that we've got people coming from all over the place. They don't want to do an hour or 2 hour drive for an hour meeting and then go home.
Yeah, so our committees will be invited back in July, but it will be with the webcam conference room. So you don't have to come in person. If you either can't, your schedule changes, you're not comfortable yet, that's fine. Our staff will always be there for the committee meeting, whatever staff liaison is there. And then, but we'll social distance the conference room and spread chairs out, things like that.
Now, I will say we don't require, but we strongly recommend that if people are using Zoom, that they use their camera. You know, we're not gonna chastise you if you don't, but I would say probably 90% of our call-ins they do, which is great.
That is great. And so I think that's one of the things you have to think about is what makes sense. And maybe one committee doesn't want to do virtual. They're not good with the virtual, or they want to meet in person, or maybe it's once a year or once a quarter, you know, depending on how they meet. So one of the things to remember is to stay flexible, to be able to make those changes. And even if, let's say, it's a really good education topic that you know is going to be able to reach a bigger audience if you held it virtually versus at an in-person event, you know, maybe you think about, okay, well, this one we're going to hold 100% virtual versus trying to do a hybrid, especially for those smaller chapters that have less staff, less volunteers. Sometimes the hybrid's a little bit more difficult to manage. So again, just kind of looking at those options and see what works best for your chapters, what's working best for your members. But don't feel like you have to go back to what you were doing in 2019, because again, there's so much that's changed and the expectation of our members have changed too. So just make sure you're constantly doing that. I know we have one chapter that's doing surveys almost monthly with their members to get a pulse of where they're at and to see, okay, do we need to make a change to go all in person and not do anything do anything virtually. So again, make sure that you're surveying your members, you're getting that feedback from them, and if possible, try to segment your membership. You know, again, we keep hearing, you know, the business partners are ready to go back in person, but the managers and the homeowners aren't necessarily ready yet. And some of that might not be their own. It might be a company restriction. So are you asking that question too? Is your company willing to pay for you to come to this? Is your company willing to allow you to go to an in-person event? Because that's going to have a lot of restrictions then too for your attendees to come up. Anything else that you guys are staying up late thinking about, you know, worried about? I'm seeing a lot of thinking faces.
Hey, Denise.
Yeah.
Denise. Hi, Denise. Denise is with Orange County. She's fairly new, what, 2 months in?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And California just lifted the restrictions today, if I'm correct. And I know your president had mentioned that you guys are going back in July. And since things like, I think California is one of the last ones, I'm just wondering how that conversation has been with you all. Has it differed from anything that we've talked about here?
So we're actually going to have all this conversation tomorrow.
Oh, so this is a great prep for you.
Yes. So the board of directors actually postponed their meeting so they can be the day after the announcement from Governor Newsom. So now that we know it actually is happening, it's just with California, I'm sure with all the states, but it seems especially with California, they announce something, but then there's always the underlying, you have to do this and you have to do that. They keep changing the goalposts. So we have a bunch of events ready to go live. We were just waiting to get the final, stamp of approval from the board of directors. So I had to pull together different scenarios, a scenario based on where we were in yellow tier, which was maximum of 200 people, social distancing, so forth, how that would impact our budget. And then another scenario with the anticipation of opening up fully, not knowing if that was actually going to take place. So it's going to be a discussion tomorrow. So I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, that it's a go. I know the last board meeting, I was really surprised. And obviously, as Crystal said, I'm new, but I'm kind of I'm the green wristband person. I'm like, let's go. I mean, we're out to dinner whenever we possibly can and so forth. So it really surprised me in the last board meeting that I had a couple people that were just breaks. They were worried about lawsuits, just constant different things like that. And I was really surprised by that. So then I had to kind of take a step back and realize, okay, I'm actually new to this COVID because I was really kind of working from home, not really involved with putting together events when COVID started. So I have to now kind of remember that there's a handful of people, there's a portion of people that are not interested or not comfortable with coming back live. So.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to launch just another poll really quick about when you plan on having your next inside in-person event. So I'll give you guys a second for that. And while you guys are doing that, I am going to share my screen just as a final reminder. So again, we've got lots of documents here for you to reference. And again, this is on the chapter toolkit area of the website. So remember to log into your account to get this. If you have anything that you would like to share with others, please feel free and send them over to Emily, and we will go ahead and we will get them added to this area. Again, most of this information is from an outside source. So it's from the Event Industry Council. That's these Apex booklets here. And this EIC, that's the Event Industry Council. There's also a really good one from Meetings Industry Today, which is the New Normal e-Handbook. It's a very big book. I believe it's about 40 pages, but it goes through different areas, including like pre-communication, whether it's with the venue, with your attendees. So that might be something good for some light reading whenever you have time. But again, I think a lot of these things are just really good for you to reference as you're going back to get your mind to thinking, in this new space that we're in. Again, we're not going back to the same in-person events that we were in 2019. So please, keep that in mind. Again, if you're looking for anything specific, and we don't have it, please let one of us know, or again, reach out to the exchange group of your CEDs and see if anyone can help reference there. And I also ask that, just keeping that communication open with each other, that if you have a really good experience from an event, share that with the other CEDs. What did you do? Why was it successful? Tony, I know you guys with your trade show this week, you'll probably have some challenges, some successes, but I think with sharing that out, it will help others prepare themselves too for their events. With that, that's all that I have. Is there anything else that you guys want to discuss before we head out today? I'm seeing a lot of no's and thinking faces. All right, well, thank you guys for all joining us. Thank you for participating in this discussion with us today. We've got some more stuff coming up in the next few months for everything. As a reminder, we do have the annual conference coming up in August. So please make sure that your president-elects either register for the in-person live training or the virtual training. And we will send out the links to that again within the next week or so with that.
Also with that, CEDs are not required to attend that. I've gotten some questions on that. We of course would love to have you there, but it's not required to attend, but feel free to come and see us.
All right. Well, thank you for your time today, everybody. I hope you guys have a great day.
If you have any questions, please contact a member of the Chapter Relations team or email chapterlearning@caionline.org.